The smallest role. The last position. It's just the SAA, guys. There's no need to take it so seriously. These are some of the awful things I've heard people say about the Sergeant-at-Arms position. And it's such a crying shame because to me, it's one of the most important roles in a meeting. In Toastmasters, the Sergeant-at-Arms is what I like to call the true host of the club. They are the first face that a guest or member will see and hear come onto the stage during a meeting. And they're the ones who sets the meeting expectations for guests and members before the meeting even starts. One of the things to learn about being an SAA is about setting boundaries and enforcing them. When people enter a meeting as a member or as a guest, they need to be told what are the lines so they know not to cross them. If people are not aware of these rules, then they cannot be held accountable for breaking them. I was in a meeting once where the SAA forgot to say no sex, politics, and religion. And what happened was that during the table topics, guests were talking about political and religious views left, right, and center. And it became a very awkward meeting. The SAA was me, by the way, so it's not a mistake that I would be likely to make again after that time. Because being an SAA is also an exercise about accountability. It's about taking ownership of your actions, not just for opening the meeting, but also for keeping track of what physical objects are in the room and making sure that they're within easy reach. For example, are there table topics ballots provided for voting? Are there pens and papers available in case anyone wants to write any notes? Are ribbons in place for announcement of best table topic speaker? An online equivalent of this setting up of the room would be a Zoom host, because the Zoom host has to make sure that there's voting, the percentages thingy for best table topic speakers, that the chat can be used to drop comments or maybe timing, and that presentations are ready so that they can be shared onto the Zoom screen when the presenter is ready to go. So these are the things that an SAA has to consider. Lastly, as an SAA, you also learn to curate an extra value experience by anticipating the needs of other people. So this goes beyond just smiling and talking to people. It could also be the little things like ensuring that the air conditioning is of a good temperature, accompanying guests or members or newer members if they're not sure about what's going on, so that there's someone easy to reach to if they need some information. It could also be informing people where the toilet, smoking areas, or even emergency exits are. So making someone feel welcome could be the difference between a Toastmaster meeting and a Toastmaster meeting where people want to come back to. So now that we know what kind of skills and SAA practices, let's have a look at what kind of things are in an SAA script. Now, one of the most common things you hear in a Toastmaster meeting is the mission. It's so important to have this because it's a promise. It's a promise that every member makes at the beginning of the meeting. Every time we read it out loud, we are reaffirming that we have to be supportive and positive, not just to ourselves, but to the people around us, so we can facilitate learning. And that we're not just here to have fun. We're also here with a purpose, and that purpose is to learn about how to speak better and how to lead better. After performing the mission, next is about setting boundaries with your audience. We want the speaker to be the focus of the meeting. So that means no distracting sounds from electronic devices or side conversations that might potentially derail the speaker's thoughts or break the audience concentrations on their speech. Now, that's for a physical meeting. In a virtual meeting, we normally just say to keep your audio turned off unless you've been requested to unmute yourself. But if you don't do this, audience members might start heckling the speaker, which makes it for quite an uncomfortable experience. Now, after all of this would be the house rules. Now, different clubs would have different club cultures and therefore different rules of engagement. For example, maybe your club needs a sort of uniform to be in there, for example, suits, Or maybe something happened before and the taboo topics are now sex, politics, race, religion, and sales. There's a story there. Maybe guests are charged a small fee for attending, in which case would students get a discount? And what about when it comes to passing the floor to the next speaker? Do people shake hands? Do they bow? Do they fist bump? Do they touch elbows? Which all four things are things I've seen in a physical meeting. So, and lastly, how does the audience show appreciation to the speaker? In a physical meeting, everyone can clap. It's simple. Maybe people can do a drum roll for a best speaker. Maybe people can tap the table when someone uses the word of the day. So it's up to you what the rules will be. But during an online meeting, what happens? Do people clap but on mute, or do people unmute and then clap? Do people jazz hands if they are muted? Are reaction buttons enabled? Are they supposed to use them? And what about the chat box? Do people get to talk there when people are speaking or not? Or they're only allowed to talk to the Zoom host? So these are the things that you have to take into consideration when doing an SAA address. And then here are some tasks I've personally seen SAA perform from different clubs. Now, these are completely optional, and they add a different sort of dimension to the SAA role. You could, for example, talk about Ralph C. Smedley and how he founded Toastmasters International. You could maybe talk about the different English, Mandarin, Bahasa clubs in your area, and maybe direct guests there if they don't meet their needs in your club. You could even talk about the 11 paths and how you can choose your path through an interactive quiz on the Toastmaster website. You could even invite guests to stand up and tell everyone their name. You could also encourage everyone in the room to partake in an icebreaker. So what did you have for dinner? Oh, I had fried chicken, spaghetti, bakso, burger, and so on and so forth. Next, a club I personally know actually does a safety briefing before the meetings even begin. And lastly, I've also seen SAA open meetings with the toast to the ruler or the country. So it really is up to the club to decide what they want to add onto the SAA role, as long as the core foundations are there. So meaning the house rules and also the mission. Because these are the sort of things that the SAA has to outline at the beginning of the meeting. You need to do it so that there are no ambiguities when it comes to behaving inappropriately or appropriately. You don't want to blindside a guest during break time by asking them for money or scolding someone for telling a sexual joke when they didn't know they weren't supposed to say it in the first place. So these are the responsibility of the SAA to these rules. So that should anyone breaks these rules, the SAA has the authority to enforce them and do something about it. The SAA role is not a role to be taken lightly, but it's a role to be taken with pride, with gravity, because it's not just a role. It's a Sargeant-At-Arms. All right, thank you. I will now be opening the floor for a Q&A. Thank you very much.
Now open and ask questions about this very often I don't know what to say. The SAA is really somebody who, it's like always under the radar. Go ahead. Does anyone have a question?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Hadif, go ahead.
All right. Since you're talking about the house rule, the missions, and the founder of Toastmasters and everything, normally this is done by the TOE. But here you mentioned for the SAA, so I'm a little confused here. Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
This is because different clubs have different cultures, like I mentioned. So, and I've seen certain clubs where the TOE mentions that, and I've seen certain clubs where the responsibility is pushed onto the SAA. So what happens is that the SAA sets the tone, expectations, and what people are looking forward to seeing in the meeting, and the TOE just focuses on keeping the atmosphere up and then facilitating speakers as they come on the stage. So it very much depends on your club atmosphere.
Thank you, Ling Ling. Let me ask you a question, Ling. Let me exercise my authority as the MC. Now, one important aspect of being an SAA is that you look after the property, and in an online environment, there is no property, but there is the Zoom master. Do you think the SAA, should play the role of the Zoom master and then be trained how to use the different functionalities of the Zoom meeting? Go ahead, Ling Ling. What do you think?
Actually, I think the answer to that is just a resounding yes. Because I've always felt that it was a bit redundant to have an extra Zoom host, especially when it's not exactly an official role in the Toastmasters manual. So the role of a Zoom host is basically whatever an SAA does, except it's translated to a virtual sort of stage. And what happens is that what you have is a redundancy, because now the SAA sort of thinks, what am I supposed to do now other than come on for about 1 minute to say that, okay, guys, don't unmute yourself. So it becomes a sort of ceremonial role now. And it sort of scratches my head. So why don't, instead of, retrenching SAAs, why don't we just retrain them?
Absolutely correct. And I agree with you, Ling Ling.
I think the ribbons,
Manoj.
they can also, can also take care of the ribbons part, the best speaker. That's what we propose our SAA. But normally the SAA always did the ballots part in the club. It was their responsibility to tally the ballots and give it to the president to declare the ribbons. So what do you say about that?
You agree, Ling Ling?
I mean, yeah, that's the role of SAA, and that's why the Zoom host is basically a mirror of that, because while you have the counting the ballots and the ribbons and things like that, a Zoom host would sort of put a poll in there, and then people will vote for people, wouldn't they? So it's exactly the same as a ballot. And the things as in like putting up the certificates, making sure the names are there, flashing on the screen. So that sort of acts as a ribbon. Again, sort of a double redundancy going on there.
Absolutely agreed. Well, that's all the time that we have for questions. A round of applause, please, for Ling Ling and an excellent ideas about how to actually rock your role as an SAA. Evaluations are an important part. Thank you.